American Hardcore, a book released in 2001, chronicled the overlooked yet influential hardcore punk scene of the early to mid-'80s. In 2006, the book was turned into a well-received documentary film. The book's author, Stephen Blush, stopped through Miami on a book tour to promote the revised and expanded edition of American Hardcore.
And it was a very powerful time, and I loved the whole experience, but like everyone in the scene, I had kind of moved on. And then in the mid-'90s, when the punk revival had happened with Green Day and Rancid and Offspring, everybody was talking about hardcore, but they didn't quite have the history right, because these bands had never been in there was no Rolling Stone article. There was no, there was no news about this stuff. It was all like word of mouth. When I grew up, I was lucky enough to be in New York, and my dad worked around the corner from CBGB's, so I caught a lot of the punk rock scene as a young kid. And I really loved all that stuff, but I didn't really relate to it too much in that they were older and artistic and into Warhol and Bowie and went to art school, and a lot of these bands were English and they spoke of things that I didn't know. So when I moved to Washington, D.C. and got turned on to this new thing that was called hardcore, it really spoke to me. It was kids from the suburbs jacked on the speed and aggression of punk rock. And that's where I was coming from. So it was like an immediate thing for me. I just fell into it head first. And within a year of that, I went up to see a Dead Kennedys show and I met their manager. And he had told me that they were having trouble getting shows booked. So unknowingly, I booked the Dead Kennedys in my school cafeteria 3 blocks from the White House and almost got thrown out of school. So that kind of set me on this path as the young kid hardcore punk rock promoter in Washington. So I booked Black Flag, I booked Dead Kennedys, I booked Minor Threat, and Circle Jerks, on and on. Half these bands crashed on my couch. I think the turning point for me actually was watching the History of Rock and Roll series on PBS. It's like a 10-part series maybe, very good. I have nothing bad to say about it. But it goes about Elvis and the Beatles and Woodstock and takes you to the Clash and the Sex Pistols. And they may have mentioned the band X, and it goes straight to Nirvana. Like this 10, 15 years it never happened. And I couldn't figure that out. I couldn't figure out if they didn't know about it or they didn't consider it real music. So that's really what put me on this path to do it. When I started the book in 1995, there was no internet as we knew it. So I tracked down everybody and climbed into their closets and found the boxes and pulled out the flyers, and it was like archaeology, and I had to construct the house. And that's what I did with the first one, was I built the framework of the house. Then I learned so much more information after the book came out. Then I worked on the film with Paul Rackman, and I basically rewrote the whole damn thing. So it's like 100 pages. It even has a new conclusion. And that new conclusion is, instead of saying that hardcore ended in the mid-'80s. Really what I'm saying is that this early '80s movement inspired generations of hardcore and like-minded bands to come. It's kind of like telling the story of Christianity and saying it ended with the death of Christ. Right. There's the followers that come, and that's just as important. So I've learned that, and I'm man enough to say that. We look back, kind of stoically about some of these bands, about how incredible it was, but it was really difficult. I hear kids today kind of make fun of Henry Rollins sometimes, and I jump into his defense because nobody had it harder than those guys. I mean, it was like a war, and there was like little safe houses around the country, and those were the scenes. So I'm not saying like, oh, I had it so hard, or I don't want to sound like that guy who says I had to walk 5 miles to school, you don't know how hard you have it. But there was this intensity about it. And that's what the thing about hardcore is to me. It's not like the sound. It's not like bands, I'm not talking about who could play the good mosh riff or who rules the pit. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a social movement. This was like almost a political movement. I think we talk about the post-war youth movements. There was the beatniks, and the punks, the beatniks, the hippies, the punks, and hip-hop. And I think somewhere in between there you have to stick hardcore. And that's really the DIY aspect, the do-it-yourself side that we still see in music today.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned the beatniks and the punks and the hippies. In the documentary, you have Winston Smith, the graphic designer,
Correct.
who basically says that. He says that, that every generation comes up in this new form. So what do you think? Do you think there's one now? What do you think it is?
I'm very split on this one. I see a lot. I think what happened was before the internet as we know it, all we really had was rock or music. So it was very, now there's video games and there's all sorts of things that could take the attention of youth who would be part of this. And I see the punk revival, the hardcore revival, and on one hand I'm flattered by it. One hand I really love it and I'm like, wow, you guys learning the music of what I was a part of. But on the other hand, I'm like, get your own effing music. I'm looking for kids to stand up to the injustices of the world, hopefully through music. I'm not seeing it as much as I'd like to. Hopefully my book and film could be an inspiration for that.
What are your thoughts now on, a band coming together like Off, which, collects people that were part of that scene?
Sure, and you know what? That's so cool you say about the band with Keith Morris from the Circle Jerks Off. Great record. That band has the spirit. That's the first record I've heard in 5-ish years that really says to me that's the spirit of the days. But what does that say? That it took a bunch of 45, 50-year-olds to do that. So I don't want it to be that these, I don't want to be more radical than the 20-year-olds. That's not my intention. I want to see a next revolutionary music force. And I think music is still, no matter what, is the voice for change. And if people don't use it for that, if they just use it to be hip or cool, or they're not taking full advantage of it. I'm not saying they're missing the point, but they're not taking advantage because they're just part of the system.
You're connecting again with Paul Rackman to do another documentary, right?
Correct. Paul and I were talking about like what's our next project to work together, and we didn't really even have to think that hard about it. As someone who always kind of cheers for the underdog, and somebody who writes about the underdog in music, we had realized that this is the story of all the great musicians of all different genres and styles who fell through the cracks, like people with incredible resumes, but where are they? What happened to them? So this film is called Lost Rockers, and it's the story of bands who should have made it, and kind of but most importantly, it's an examination of what it takes to make it, and sometimes what people don't have to make it. So it's again, like American hardcore, it's not really a music study, it's really a sociological study.